Hey everyone, Lizzie again with another video where I draw on this book and talk about things. This time I was thinking a lot about those cell diagrams that I had to draw in high school and college while looking through a microscope. In some ways this is a kind of loose interpretation of that, but I was also kind of thinking about things like mold and what mold spores might look like close up. I looked up images afterwards of mold spores, and I'll tell you that I was completely wrong. Mold spores look more like these bulbous, hairy clusters. My thought was more like colonies. Like those big spots of mold are more like a world of their own, with different towns and cities that we could only see if we looked close enough. And that mold growth is like the population growth humans experience in what we call the real world. I guess the bigger world is more accurate. Like, as a colony of mold takes over some surface, it has some kind of collective awareness of the size and shape of that surface, and how many little spores can fit on it before everything is too crowded. I guess a little bit like yeast. I used to have my own sourdough starter for making bread that I made from a recipe in a pretty well-known and well-researched book on sourdough bread. Every so often, I would forget to feed the starter on a day that was too hot, or I would find my starter smelling like alcohol with a layer of dark liquid on the top. This was evidence that many of the yeast I had cultivated had starved to death, because without more flour every day or two, or without slowing the yeast down by putting it in the refrigerator, a well-established colony will eat through its entire food supply in about 24 hours and begin to die. An interesting side note, at least to me. Do you know what makes sourdough bread sour? It's actually lactobacillus. Now, there are many different species of lactobacillus, but the most famous is Lactobacillus acidophilus, which is a really interesting little bacteria. Again, this may just be interesting to me. Lactobacillus lives in harmony with the types of yeast found in sourdough bread, but it's also responsible for a whole lot of foods that go through some kind of fermentation process, like yogurt, kombucha, miso, and kimchi. But Lactobacillus acidophilus is also one of the major bacterium that keep our digestive systems and some other systems healthy. This brings me to another interesting point, that there are about 10 times as many bacteria than our own cells in and on our bodies. Now, some of these bacteria can cause illnesses like Staphylococcus, which lives in our noses and is the bacteria responsible for staph infections. But most of those bacteria are actually good, like Lactobacillus. I guess my thought here is that we're all a little bit like the jar of sourdough starter or the wall covered in mold, though mold is a fungi, not a bacteria. On a biological level, we're in part a vessel for bacteria. But for the majority of the time, that bacteria helps us be healthy, unless something is missing or another thing grows without being controlled. So we're in this symbiotic state where everything works as it's supposed to and all of our bacteria work together well. But when the system is off balance, the bad bacteria are allowed to grow like mold and cover the wall until something else attacks them. Did you know that some scientists have found a link between gut health and depression? I've also read some anecdotal evidence of a link between gut health and obsessive-compulsive disorder. Now, these links may or may not be accurate, and definitely see a professional if you're dealing with any symptoms, but I find the idea of a link between an out-of-balance collection of bacteria and our state of well-being to be kind of beautiful. As if the colony of bacteria, the residents of our bodies, if you will, are talking to us in the only way they know how, by revolting. Thinking this way, I start to think about how we live on the earth in a very similar way to the way that bacteria lives on our skin. And I wonder what kinds of things we would say to the earth if we believed that it could listen. Would we say thank you? Would we tell it that we need something more? I don't know. I guess I just think that this is another one of those things that's interesting to think about. I think that's all I have to talk about this time. So, yeah, thank you for watching.